The first time the HOA posted a notice calling my antique tractor collection visual pollution, I was standing in my driveway under a bright, cloudless sky wiping grease from my hands and admiring the way the sun hit the faded red paint of my 1939 Farmall. The metal glowed warm in the light like it still remembered working fields 80 years ago. That's when Carl, 50 years old, pink dress shirt stretched over his gut and black dress pants creased sharp, marched up with a clipboard tucked against his side like a sheriff issuing a warrant. I stood there in my black and red checkered flannel shirt, arms crossed, sweat drying on my forearms from the morning's restoration work, and waited for him to spit out whatever new rule he thought he could bully me with. He pointed at my tractors lined neatly along my side yard. The Farmall, the rust orange Alley's Chalmers, the faded green Oliver, each one parked like old soldiers shining in the mid-morning sun. These, he said, lips pulling into a smirk that made my stomach tighten, are violations. They lower community appeal. They're eyesores, visual pollution. Those last words hit me wrong. My chest heated not from the sun but from something sharp and angry. These tractors weren't junk. They were restored pieces of American farm history. My father collected them. I kept them running. They were my connection to him. I asked Carl what rule I was supposedly breaking. He slapped a highlighted page against his clipboard so aggressively the sunlight flashed off the plastic cover. It said non-standard exterior equipment. I told him tractors weren't equipment, they were vehicles and licensed antiques at that. He didn't blink. Residents have complained, he said, voice smug in that way only people who have never been punched in the nose talk. This collection, if you can call it that, needs to be removed within 10 days. I stared at him, then at the tractors sitting proud and sunlit metal warming in the summer heat. My jaw tightened. I told him calmly he was wrong and he'd need actual legal grounds to force me to move anything. His lips curled like he'd been waiting for me to say that. He handed me the violation notice, bright orange under the sun, and walked off with his shoulders bouncing like he'd won something. That was the first shot fired. I didn't know then just how far he'd go to try removing these machines from my property. By noon the next day, a second notice was taped to my front door. This one claimed the tractors posed environmental hazards, leaking toxic fluids. I crouched under the full glare of the sun, reading it 3 times. My tractors didn't leak. They were restored meticulously, new gaskets, sealed lines, clean engines. The smell of oil on the notice wasn't from my machines. It was from the can Carl must have used to smear the pavement behind my fence. I looked at the dark patch smear that magically appeared overnight and felt my fists clench. I knew a setup when I saw one. My background wasn't some mystery, 40-year-old mechanic, former heavy equipment technician. I'd rebuilt machines that weighed more than Carl's SUV. If he thought oil theatrics would fool me, he didn't know who he was dealing with. I spent the afternoon documenting everything. Photos under direct sunlight, timestamps before and after shots of the pavement. If Carl wanted war, I'd answer with precision. 2 days later, things escalated. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, sun warming the ceramic mug, and froze. The Alley's Chalmers, my dad's favorite, was covered in large, ugly stickers reading remove or be FINED. My throat tightened. I peeled one off, the adhesive fighting me, leaving patches of residue across the restored fender. I felt something inside me twist hard. Carl stood across the street pretending to chat with another neighbor, but his eyes flicked toward me every few seconds. He wanted me to react. I didn't. I just took photos, each one in perfect daylight clarity. By the end of the week, the fines started arriving daily. Non-compliant vehicle. Unauthorized commercial equipment. Community aesthetic violation. Each envelope glared white in the sun when I pulled it from the mailbox. I stacked them on my workbench, flipping through them with shaking hands. The totals reached over $1,000 before Friday. I knew the pattern. I'd seen bullies like him in shops and yards for years, men who got power and used it to push until someone pushed back. What I didn't expect was the next move. On Saturday morning, a towing company truck pulled up to my house, hazard lights flashing bright orange in the clear sun. A man in a neon vest asked if I was marked with the tractor removal order. My stomach dropped. I demanded to see the order. He handed me a printed sheet signed by Carl, unauthorized, illegal, blatantly fake. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept my voice level. I told the tow operator he was about to commit theft if he touched anything on my property. He looked uncertain, glanced at the tractors lined in the sun, then at the forged paper. "I'm gonna call this in," he muttered and stepped aside. I photographed everything: the truck, the operator, the fake order with Carl's signature shimmering faintly as sunlight hit the page. Something had shifted. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was criminal. That night, as the sun dipped but still cast bright orange over the neighborhood, I sat in my garage with my laptop open. I organized the photos, the violation letters, the forged order. My hands shook not from fear but from the weight of what I knew had to come next. Carl had crossed legal boundaries. Now I had to build a case strong enough to sink him, and I wasn't going to do it alone. My old buddy Shane, a county records officer, also all male, like everyone in this story, had once told me, if someone's abusing authority, follow the paper trail. They always leave one. A light clicked on inside me. Carl's downfall was going to start with documents and end with handcuffs. The next morning, bright sunlight poured across my driveway like a spotlight, and I knew it was time to act. I pulled on my black and red checkered flannel shirt, grabbed my binder, and headed to the county records office where my buddy Shane worked. The government building sat under a perfectly clear blue sky, the flag out front snapping loud and sharp in the warm breeze. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows onto the polished floors. Shane, 45, buzz-cut hair, khaki shirt, and a permanent squint from years outdoors met me in the lobby with a firm handshake. "You look fired up," he said, leading me toward his office. "Carl causing trouble again?" I opened the binder, letting the pages catch the bright light from the window. He flipped through the forged tow order first, his eyebrows shot up. "This is criminal," he muttered. "He signed this himself," I nodded. "He tried to tow my dad's Alice Chalmers." Shane set the order on his desk and pressed his fingers against his forehead. "Okay, we're digging." He logged into the county system, the screen reflecting sunlight off the glass partition behind him. "Let's pull every filing your HOA president has made in the last 2 years." The list was longer than either of us expected. Dozens of complaints, requests, violation filings, and enforcement actions, many more than the typical HOA would generate. Shane printed them all, the pages sliding warm from the machine into a stack almost an inch thick. Out in the sunlight filtering through the office windows, the list looked even longer. "These are excessive," Shane said, "suspiciously excessive." We scanned each line and patterns started forming. Many complaints were listed under anonymous resident submissions, but the handwriting matched Carl's. The dates lined up with times he'd picked fights with other homeowners. The wording echoed the same dramatic style he used in my notices: severe aesthetic disruption, threat to community integrity, hazardous exterior conditions. I felt my jaw clench. This wasn't targeted at me alone, it was a pattern of abuse. "He's manufacturing violations," I murmured. Shane nodded grimly. "If he forged resident complaints to justify enforcement actions, that's fraud." I felt a cold, steady anger settle in my chest. This wasn't a personal vendetta anymore, it was systematic corruption. We kept digging. Shane pulled financial statements submitted by the HOA. I saw line items for fines collected, but some numbers didn't match anything in the enforcement database. Missing funds, discrepancies across several months. I leaned closer, heart thumping. "Where's the rest of the money?" I asked quietly. Shane didn't speak for a moment. He highlighted 3 statements, laid them side by side in the sunlight. "Someone's siphoning," he said, "and given who signs off on these reports." His voice trailed off. I didn't need him to finish. "Carl, the pink-shirted tyrant wasn't just after my tractors, he was using fines to funnel money." My stomach tightened. "We need more evidence," I said. "Hard evidence," Shane nodded. "Then you need to get residents to talk." That was the hardest part. Men in our neighborhood were tired, busy, and not eager to make enemies with the HOA. But I went door to door anyway, under the blazing afternoon sun, binder under my arm, tractor grease still under my fingernails. First up was Luke, a quiet guy who always wore the same gray t-shirt and jeans. He answered the door, squinting into the bright light. "Mark, everything okay?" I showed him the forged tow order. His eyes widened. "He seriously tried that," he said. "And you're not the only one," I replied. "Mind if I ask, have you gotten weird fines lately?" He stepped back inside and returned with a shoebox full of letters. Sunlight streamed onto the kitchen table as he dumped them out, pink envelopes, white ones, some marked "final warning." "He fined me for a dangerous lawn edging condition," Luke said, pointing at one. "It's just metal trim," he said. "It endangered the community." The fines were outrageous, hundreds stacked on hundreds. My blood boiled. "Would you give me copies?" I asked. "If this goes to court, resident testimony matters." Luke nodded. "Take whatever you need." I spent the rest of the day gathering stories. One homeowner had been fined for having 2 reflective windows. Another had been cited for a non-compliant tool shed built by the previous homeowner a decade earlier. Every man I spoke to had the same story: Carl targeting them, inflating charges, threatening liens, all under the same bright, merciless sunlight. By evening, my binder was bursting with evidence, but something still bothered me. Every time Carl attacked someone, he justified it with anonymous complaints. So where were these anonymous residents? I knew the truth, but I needed proof. That night, still full daylight because the sun set late in our part of the state, I walked past the HOA office. Its front windows were huge, sunlight reflecting off the glass and illuminating everything inside. I cupped my hands against the window and peered in. The office was empty except for a stack of papers on Carl's desk. I recognized the layout instantly: violation forms, and on top a list titled "Complaint Templates." My breath caught. These weren't complaints from residents. They were pre-written scripts Carl filled out whenever he wanted justification. Fraud, clear as day. I took photos through the glass, angling my phone to avoid glare. I felt like my heart was thundering against my ribs, but I had what I needed. The next morning, when sunlight washed across my driveway like a blessing, I made the decision. It was time to expose him publicly, and the next HOA meeting was only 2 days away. Perfect. In those 2 days, Carl didn't slow down, he accelerated. More fines, more threats. He even delivered a notice claiming my tractors produced unacceptable brightness levels due to reflective surfaces, which almost made me laugh before anger took over again. He was spiraling, and spiraling people make mistakes. I spent those 2 days preparing, organizing, printing, highlighting. Shane helped create a chronological map of Carl's fraudulent filings. Luke helped gather neighbor statements. Another resident, Tim, big guy, arms like tree trunks, helped me organize copies of every forged complaint. By the time the meeting rolled around, my binder had turned into a weapon, and I was ready to use it. The meeting hall was full of sunlight. Men filled the folding chairs. Carl stood at the front, pink shirt practically glowing, smug smile ready. He thought today would be his victory lap. He had no idea that by the end of this meeting, he'd be cornered, exposed, and on his way to losing everything. The meeting room was flooded with bright daylight from the long row of windows along the east wall, so much sunlight that every metal chair had a sharp glint along its edges. I walked in carrying my binder like it was an engine block, solid, heavy, undeniable. Men filled the seats, some with arms crossed, some whispering, all curious. At the front stood Carl in his pink dress shirt and black dress pants, chin high, clipboard hugged tight against his gut. He looked like a man ready to announce a victory parade. Instead, he was about to meet the wall he'd built for himself. He tapped the microphone, the feedback squealing briefly in the bright room. "We are here," he said loudly, "to address a serious visual issue in the community and to vote on the removal of non-compliant machinery currently degrading neighborhood standards." His eyes locked onto me, smug and cold. I took a slow breath. My heart pounded steady, not nervous, just charged. Carl launched into his presentation, flipping pages while the sunlight lit up the sweat forming on his forehead. "For months, residents have filed complaints," he declared, pulling out a thick stack of papers. "These tractors are rusting junk, hazardous, unprofessional, and inconsistent with the harmonious appearance our HOA is responsible to maintain." He raised a page dramatically. "This complaint here states the tractors attract rodents. This one says they interfere with the visual cohesion of the street. This one says," I stepped forward. "Carl," I said, voice steady, "before you go any further, I'd like to ask the room a question." He froze. "You don't get to interrupt." Robert, the vice president, lifted a hand. "Let him speak." Carl's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. I turned to the men seated in the rows, sunlight brightening the floor around their shoes. "Has anyone here filed a complaint against my tractors?" I asked. "Raise your hand." The room stayed silent. No hands, not one man moved. Carl blinked rapidly. "That's odd," I continued, "considering the stack of complaints your president has." I walked to the front table, the soles of my boots echoing lightly. I opened my binder. "Let's look at something else," I said. I flipped to a set of photos, ones I took through the HOA office window. I held them up so the sun caught the glossy paper. "These are the complaint templates," I said, pre-written all in the same handwriting, filed as if they came from residents. Every anonymous complaint was written by Carl himself. A ripple went through the room, men whispering, brows furrowing. Carl sputtered. "Lies, you broke into my office." "No," I said calmly. "I photographed them through the window, in full daylight, as any resident could legally do." Robert took one of the photos and held it up to the light, his eyes narrowed. "This is your handwriting, Carl." Carl's face reddened. I was documenting community concerns. I ignored him and pulled out the next set of documents, financial statements highlighted by Shane. "Let's talk about the fines," I said. "Here are the amounts the HOA claims to have collected." I pointed to the totals on the printed sheets. "And here are bank deposit records from the same periods." The discrepancy was immediate and obvious. Several $1,000s were unaccounted for. Tim, the big guy from down the street, stood up from his chair. "Where's the money, Carl?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. Carl's eyes darted from side to side, sweat rolled down his temple, catching the light. "Administrative fees," he stammered. "Show us," I said. He swallowed. "You can't produce records because you forged complaints to issue fines, collected the money, and kept a portion," I said, feeling heat rising in my chest but forcing my voice to stay even. "But that's not all." I flipped to the forged tow order, the sunlight practically glowing through the thin paper. "This is the order you signed to illegally tow vehicles from my property. That's criminal." A murmur rose, anger now, not confusion. Robert looked at the document, then back at Carl. "Did you authorize a tow of registered antique vehicles?" Carl didn't answer. I pulled out the final piece, the environmental smear. Photos of the oil Carl poured behind my fence to frame my tractors. "This," I said, "was manufactured." I took before and after photos, and the soil tested negative for petroleum contamination. "You created this scene." Carl opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I pressed forward. "You abused your position to target homeowners, create false violations, pocket fine money, and attempt to seize personal property. And you did every bit of it under the assumption no one would challenge you." The room erupted, men talking over each other, some standing, some shaking their heads. The sunlight pouring in made everything feel sharper, more intense, like the truth itself was illuminated. Robert raised his hands. "Quiet," the room settled. "We are suspending all enforcement actions pending investigation," he announced. "Effective immediately." Carl's face contorted. "You can't do this. I am the HOA president." "Not anymore," Robert said, voice firm. "By emergency vote, effective now, you are removed from your position pending legal review." Carl's breath came fast. "You're all making a mistake. He's manipulating you." I stepped closer, binder at my side. "Carl, I have spent weeks documenting everything. I have county records, financial discrepancies, witness statements, and photographs. And tomorrow morning, all of it goes to the county prosecutor." Carl stumbled backward, bumping into a chair. Tim stood up again. "Meeting S over," he declared. Carl bolted for the exit, sunlight catching his pink shirt as he pushed through the door like a man fleeing a wildfire. But he wasn't escaping anything. He had just entered the part of the story where the law takes over and where I stop being his victim and become the person who shuts him down for good. As the room cleared, Robert approached me. "Mark," he said quietly, "we're with you. Whatever you need next will help." I nodded, the sunlight warm on my shoulders. Next, I said, we take this to the authorities. The next morning, the sun was already blazing when I pulled into the county administration complex. The building's glass facade reflected the clear blue sky so brightly it looked like a second sky hovering in front of me. I stepped out of my truck with my binder in one hand, the weight of it solid and reassuring. Today wasn't about tractors or HOA politics anymore. Today was about exposing a man who thought power gave him permission to do anything. Inside, sunlight poured through tall skylights, illuminating the lobby like a showroom. Tom, the county fraud investigator assigned after Shane forwarded the initial documents, met me near the reception desk. He was a tall man in a dark green button-up shirt, sleeves rolled tight around muscular forearms, clipboard tucked under his arm. He gave me a short nod. "Morning, Mark," he said. "You ready?" "More than ready," I answered. We headed to a private conference room with glass walls and blinds pulled up, allowing direct sunlight to spill across the long table. Tom motioned for me to lay out everything. I opened the binder and started arranging evidence like engine parts on a shop bench, forged complaints, fake tow authorization, photos of environmental staging, financial discrepancies, resident testimonies. Tom looked over each document with the intensity of a man used to dismantling lies piece by piece. "Carl didn't just bend rules," he muttered. "He committed fraud, falsified government filings, misappropriated funds, and attempted property seizure." "Yeah," I said, jaw tightening, "and he thought no one would connect the dots." Tom pulled out his phone and snapped pictures of each document in the bright daylight. "This is enough for charges. But the DA will want even more, especially from the HOA's accounting." I nodded. "I can get you whatever the board has. They're cooperating now. And they'll need to," he replied. "Because this doesn't stop at Carl." Someone else on that board looked the other way. That chilled me more than I expected. Tom leaned forward. "We need every original document the HOA filed with the county. I'll subpoena the full set, but if the board can get you internal copies, that speeds things up." I called Robert right there, sunlight shining across my phone screen. "Bring the files to the tractor guy," he said to someone on his end. "All of them." Within an hour, 2 board members showed up with 3 boxes of HOA documents. We spread them out in the sunlit conference room, pages everywhere, financial ledgers mixed with meeting minutes. Patterns emerged immediately. Carl had quietly inserted fine increases without votes. He'd signed off on reimbursements for community improvements that never happened. He'd written dozens of complaints in different handwriting styles, sloppy disguises, but all identical in wording. And then we found the smoking engine block, a private account linked to Carl, funded by a trail of unrecorded administrative processing fees. My chest tightened. Tom exhaled slowly. "That's embezzlement." The room grew quiet except for the sound of paper rustling in the sunlit air. "This is worse than we thought," Tom continued. "The DA's office will move on this fast." By mid-afternoon, Tom had everything he needed. "We'll be contacting you," he said. "When this goes to court, your testimony and the documentation will be central." I walked out of the building into the hot sun, feeling like my flannel shirt weighed an extra 10 pounds, not from exhaustion, from relief mixed with rage. The truth was out, but Carl hadn't faced consequences yet. That changed fast. By the next morning, word spread across the neighborhood like wildfire lit under a magnifying glass. Men were gathered in front yards, hands on hips, talking under the blazing sun. My phone buzzed nonstop. "Mark, sheriff's deputies are at Carl's house. He's on the lawn yelling." "Man, you broke him." I didn't go over. I just stood in my driveway beside the antique tractors, all of them shining like old jewels under the clear sky. Around noon, Robert walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. "They took him in," he said. "Cuffed him right there. Charges pending." I nodded. I didn't smile. It wasn't a victory yet. "We're calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight," he added. "Full daylight meeting, outdoor transparency." That evening, we gathered on the open lawn by the community pool, the setting sun still bright enough to light every face clearly. Every chair was filled. Robert stepped forward. "Carl has been removed permanently," he said. "A full audit is underway, and we owe someone here a huge apology." Every head turned toward me. I stayed quiet. Robert continued. "Our HOA has been run like a private fiefdom, and we missed it. But thanks to documented evidence, multiple witnesses, and cooperation with county investigators, this ends now." People clapped, not loud but steady. Luke raised his voice. "Mark, what do you want from the HOA?" I looked at the tractors visible from where I stood. Their metal gleamed bright red, green, and orange under the fading yet still vivid sunlight. "I want 3 things," I said. "First, every fraudulent fine refunded to everyone." Men nodded. "Second, new bylaws requiring transparency and enforcement." More nods. "And third, I want antique agricultural vehicles formally recognized as historically significant displays." Cheers erupted. Robert smiled. "Done, all 3. But then I saw something in his expression: seriousness. "There's one more thing," he said. "The DA's office wants you to be present tomorrow. They're filing charges." My heartbeat slowed. "Against Carl?" I asked. "Against Carl," he said, "and possibly others." A quiet settled over the men, not fear, anticipation. I exhaled slowly, sunlight warming my shoulders. Tomorrow would be the reckoning, and I would be there to see it. The next morning came in blazing, with sunlight so sharp it made every surface in my house glow like polished metal. And as I pulled on my black and red checkered flannel shirt and stepped outside, I felt the strange calm that hits right before a final showdown. I drove to the courthouse with the windows down, the warm wind rushing past me, the sky a perfect, uninterrupted blue overhead. My binder sat on the passenger seat, buckled in like a co-pilot ready for battle. When I arrived, the courthouse steps were already crowded with county officials and attorneys, the heavy wooden doors propped open to let in sunlight, turning the entire lobby into a blindingly bright stage. Tom, the investigator in the dark green shirt, met me at the entrance. "Today's the day," he said, his voice steady, his expression tight. Inside the courtroom, the blinds were open as always, sunlight illuminating every grain in the wooden tables. Carl sat at the defense table, pink dress shirt wrinkled for the first time since I'd known him, black pants creased but sloppy, his face pale and sweaty in the harsh light. His attorney flipped through papers nervously. The district attorney, tall with a navy suit that practically glowed in the daylight, opened with a clear statement. "Your Honor, we are filing charges of embezzlement, falsification of government documents, attempted unlawful seizure of private property, environmental staging, and fraudulent use of HOA authority." Carl's shoulders sagged visibly. I watched him lick his lips like his tongue had turned to dust. The DA then called me to the witness stand. I felt the warmth from the sunlight-filled window as I sat down, and I told the story straight through. The first violation, the false environmental claims, the forged tow order, the stacks of fake complaints matching Carl's handwriting, the missing funds, the staged oil spill, the financial discrepancies uncovered with Shane's help. When the DA displayed the photos I took through the HOA office window, the bright images projected onto the large monitor made everything look even more incriminating, Carl's per-written complaint templates glowing under fluorescent and natural sunlight combined. When the forged tow order came up, Carl's head dropped. His attorney whispered frantically into his ear, but Carl didn't respond. He just stared at the polished floor reflecting sunlight in broken patches. Then came the financial documents. Tom explained them piece by piece. Money collected but never deposited, administrative fees that never existed, reimbursement payments written without approval, all signed by Carl. Each point struck like a hammer. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the ceiling vents and the scratch of the judge's pen across a notepad. When the DA finished, the defense tried to spin it, claimed Carl was acting in the community's best interest, that he felt pressured, that he misinterpreted bylaws. But every excuse collapsed under the weight of documented proof. After closing statements, the judge sat back, sunlight catching the top of his silver hair. "I have seen many abuses of HOA authority," he said slowly, voice echoing in the bright room, "but this level of deception, falsification, and personal enrichment is among the worst." Carl stared at his knees. "I hereby find Carl Benson guilty on all charges presented." A collective exhale rippled through the room. Even the security officers standing by the door glanced at one another. The sentencing came next, delivered in the same steady tone. 18 months in county detention, suspended only if he completed full restitution to every homeowner, mandatory repayment of all stolen funds, a permanent ban from serving on any HOA or governing board, community service involving municipal restoration work under supervision, and a 5-year probation period with mandatory financial oversight. The judge's voice dropped slightly. "This court also recognizes the harm done to Mr. Mark Hollies. The attempt to seize his property, falsify conditions, and levy fraudulent fines warrants additional restitution." I felt my chest tighten not from nerves but from the weight of vindication. The gavel struck once, loud and solid. Officers stepped forward, hands on Carl's arms. For a brief moment, sunlight hit his pink shirt so brightly it almost blinded me, and then he was escorted out the side door, disappearing from the frame of my story as quickly as he once barged into it. After court, the HOA board gathered in the open community lawn, sunlight pouring across the grass, every man there standing tall and quiet. Robert approached me first. "Mark," he said, "we owe you more than apologies. We owe you a community that works the way it's supposed to." He handed me an official document, a newly revised bylaw naming historically significant machinery collections as protected displays under community heritage exceptions. "Your tractors," he said, "are now part of the neighborhood's identity." I looked across the lawn where the tops of my antique tractors peeked over my fence line, metal gleaming under the sun like redeemed relics. Men clapped my back, shook my hand, offered help with restorations, even asked if I'd do a weekend tour for their kids. I felt a warmth in my chest deeper than sunlight. A week later, refunds began arriving in mailboxes, stacks of them, every fraudulent fine Carl issued reversed. The HOA books were opened fully and permanently. New transparency rules passed unanimously. The enforcement committee was replaced by a rotating panel of homeowners. And the community, for the first time since I'd lived there, actually felt like a group of men working together instead of living under one man's thumb. On a bright Saturday afternoon, I rolled my father's Ali's Chalmers into the front yard, engine rumbling deep and smooth, sunlight bouncing off the restored metal. Neighbors came by to watch. Some helped polish chrome, some listened to the engine like it was a song from another era. As I stood there, sleeves rolled up, sun warming my back, I realized the tractors weren't just mine anymore. They were part of the community story, a story forged in daylight, documented with truth, and sealed with justice. And as the engine idled low, rattling through the warm air, I thought about the journey that started with a single violation notice taped to my door. Carl tried to call my history visual pollution, but all he did was help shine a brighter light on it. And in that light, everything became clear. The tractors stayed, the truth won, and the HOA finally learned what happens when a man in a pink shirt tries to mess with a man who's got documentation, determination, and a legacy made of steel.